Good morning, everyone. I have 9 o'clock, and this is the Senate Education Committee. So will you please stand and we'll recite the pledge. Ms. Sullivan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So open the public hearing, the Senate Education Committee, and we have Senate Bill 96. And the prime sponsor, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I am Senator Tim Lang from Senate District 2, representing the Lakes region all the way up to Campton and Thornton in the great state of New Hampshire. I bring before you a bill. We passed this bill last year. This bill is slightly modified from last year. It went over to the House. It had some issues over in the House. We heard some testimony over there. So the bill's been redrafted. Again, taking into account all the conversation that occurred within this committee last term, as well as over in the House. The bill is really clear, really simple, right? So one-page bill. It's known as the Honesty and Transparency in Education Act. Section 1 of the bill just establishes a default statewide standard for all school districts in the state on how they respond to parents. When a parent puts in a written request, what the timeline looks like, and making it clear that the information has to be honest and complete when you respond to a parent's question. The second part of the bill creates some carve-outs. We recognize there may be some issues where information given to a parent could cause or increase the risk to a child. We don't want that risk to happen. So the second paragraph allows for withhold of that information, but then creates what is required. If you're going to choose to withhold information from a parent, what you must do, and that is to file a report. If you think that a child is at risk because you know something that the parents don't know, whether you tell a parent or not, that child's still at risk, and there should be some action. If a teacher believes or a credential holder believes that that child's at risk, and so much at risk that they need to withhold information from the parents, that should require some reporting, and that's what Section 2 does, is it requires the reporting that says that that teacher who knows that this child is at risk, should the disclosure of the information occur, they need to report it and notify HHS so appropriate investigation can be done to see if the child is at risk and if any actions need to be taken by the state. Section 3 and 4 just establishes rules and establishes process, what happens when you violate this law. It's that simple. That's the entire bill. Our goal is to make sure, I always talk about the fact that I know we talk a lot about trust relationships between teachers and students a lot, and how breaking of the trust relation with teachers and students. But everyone seems to forget the first trust relationship is between the teacher and the parent. The parent trusts the school with their child and bring it in. We should do nothing to undermine that primary trust relationship at any cost. And I think there's been some situations where parents have felt that they weren't being, schools weren't being honest, schools weren't being responsive. And so this bill, again, emphasizes that trust relationship between the parent and the teacher is the primary trust relationship, and everything else stems from that. And you shouldn't do anything to break that trust between the parent and the teacher. And this just codifies that process. Happy to take questions.
Questions from the committee members? I see no questions.
Oh.
Thank you. Do you have a question,
Yeah,
Senator Sullivan?
So part 2 is, I'm sorry, glasses help. And part 3 is basically, oh no, I'm sorry, it is part 2. That is just backing up the mandated reporter.
Correct.
In the state.
Right, so again,
every adult is a mandated reporter.
There's certain professions that have obligations under our law to report when a child's at risk for harm or danger. This just reemphasizes that. Again, I want to emphasize, and I can't say it enough, that if a teacher thinks a child's at risk, whether they tell a parent or not, that child's still at risk, and the teacher should report that. Right? That's the bottom line, right? If the disclosure of the information is going to create a risk, then the child's already at risk. So again, that is the mandatory report. It talks about mandatory reporting. If you think a child's at risk, you should report it to the appropriate authorities.
Thank you, Senator.
You all set?
I'm all set.
Thank you very much. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6. Okay, I'm calling the first speaker, Heidi Heath. Now, if you have heard something, now you're the first one, so if the rest of you have heard something that you agree with, just either say that you agree with the previous speaker or add something new that has not been touched on. So, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Senators, thank you for hearing my testimony today. I'm Heidi Carrington Heath, and I serve as the Executive Director of New Hampshire Outright. We are the state's oldest LGBTQ+ organization, and we serve LGBTQ+ youth and their families across the Granite State. I'm here this morning to ask you to vote ITL on SB 96. Our objections here are simple and clear. Students deserve to be safe at school. They deserve the opportunity to have safe, confidential conversations with trusted adults in preparation for having those conversations with their parents and caregivers. We too want kids to have primary and honest relationships with their parents and folks at home. We believe these things support one another and are not at odds with each other. Students deserve the opportunity to develop healthy autonomy and learn to advocate for their own well-being. This bill puts the health and well-being of LGBTQ+ students, an already vulnerable group, particularly at risk. The language in this bill is vague and a bit unclear. It could be construed as a mandate to out students to their parents before they are ready, or in situations where there may be concerns about doing so. We know that students learn best and are most successful in a school environment when they feel safe, seen, and protected. The New Hampshire Department of Education's own words state clearly what we know to be true. Research shows that youth who can name a trusted adult outside of their home are less likely to bully or be bullied, suffer from depression, abuse substances, be suspended, expelled, or drop out of school. In short, we are asking that this committee live up to what our own DOE has already advocated for and to protect the relationship between students, including LGBTQ+ students, and a trusted adult at school. At New Hampshire Outright, we seek to foster community, empathy, and understanding, and we believe this bill is detrimental to that work. Thank you for your time this morning.
Any questions from the committee members? See none.
Thank you very much.
Holly Stevens?
Chair, Award members of the committee, my name is Holly Stevens. I'm the Director of Public Policy at NAMI New Hampshire. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. NAMI New Hampshire recognizes the fundamental importance of parent-child relationships in a person's development and the impact it has on their lifelong mental health and opportunities. Parents not only have the right to direct the upbringing and care of their children, but also the responsibility to do so, to provide the supports and resources they need to become healthy, thriving adults. With this in mind, NAMI New Hampshire is not taking a position on Senate Bill 96 as introduced. But however, we wanted to share the following concerns. In New Hampshire, 15,000 youth ages 12 to 17 have depression. 1 in 5 youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental illness each year in our state, and this is an increase from 1 in 6 in previous years. Further, everyday youth are boarding in the emergency departments while waiting for inpatient care, and it is with these statistics in mind that NAMI New Hampshire offers the following comments. As an organization, we agree that family relationships are the most impactful within a child's life. But we know that these are not the only relationships that children have, and that it takes a full community to support and ensure the health, wellness, and safety of children. Therefore, NAMI New Hampshire has some concerns relating to the, quote, completely and honestly language of the bill. While we do not believe it is appropriate for an educator to withhold or provide misinformation to a parent, we are concerned that this language may have a chilling effect on the educator-student relationship. Some children will approach other community members, including educators, with their questions, concerns, or feelings before opening up to their parents, as you just heard from Heidi. This is not because that relationship is more important than the relationship with the parent, but because it is a lower stakes relationship and an opportunity, I apologize, and an opportunity to explore their options. It is crucial that educators are open to having these critical conversations with students when students feel that they need to happen. We have concerns, again, with the words completely and honestly, because it may be interpreted broadly, not by the courts, but by the teachers themselves. And that the teachers may feel that they need to have notebooks and pens and paper when they're having discussions with students to take down every little detail that they hear, because they may forget something if they're posed with one of these questions. And if they forget something, then it has dire consequences for them. So it may result in teachers just telling students, I don't want to have a conversation with you. And, you know, rather than fostering those important relationships with educators, it will cause a rift between the teachers and the students, and also a rift between the parents and the teachers. A law like this presupposes that educators are innately dishonest, which, you know, we don't think is the case. We do think that parents work very hard to have those good relationships with the parents. And so for that reason, we just ask you to keep these concerns in mind as this bill goes forward in the process. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Chair Ward. Good morning, Holly. Good to see you, and thank you for taking my question. And I may have a follow-up. So I think part of what I'm hearing you say is that without definition or precedent, when using specifically completely and honestly, but there's also good faith determination, if an educator were to not recall or not have documented because they failed to recall, as time goes by, or conversations are translated from one to another, that they could be held responsible for that and potentially lose their license.
Yes. I mean, you could have a situation where the conversation happens with the teacher it may not remember, as you said, may not remember it. But if the student then tells the parent, well, I told the teacher this, and, you know, the parent then has, you know, says, well, why didn't you tell me this? Well, the teacher simply forgot. And there's nothing in here that allows for simple human mistakes. And so a teacher would be on the hook for misremembering or not remembering. And we know that, you know, from everything we've learned, that when you're observing something, you likely misremember things. And if that happens, then they could be on the hook and they could lose their license. And so therefore they would just say, I'm not going to have a conversation with you.
Well,
All covered. Thank you, Holly.
Okay,
That's what I'm-
thank you very much, Holly.
Thank you.
Michael Haley? And I should remind you, if you have something written down and going reading your testimony, please just give it to us and give us a summary.
Good morning, Chair Ward and members of the committee. My name is Michael Haley. I am an attorney at GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders. I also grew up and live in New Hampshire. While our organization and I support the goal of this bill of fostering honest and supportive relationships among teachers, parents, and students, I think this bill itself is just unfortunately fundamentally flawed. I worked in education for about 10 years before I went to law school, including 4 years in high school and middle school, and I honestly just don't know how I'd be able to implement this bill. As far as the standard of completely and honestly, that is a legal terminology that exists elsewhere in the law, and it exists in like the bankruptcy context where there are objective truths, like does this asset exist or not? Do you own this or not? And in this context, I mean, kids just say a lot of things. You hear a lot of rumors. You overhear a lot of things as a teacher. And for a teacher to have to keep track of all that and figure out what's true and what's not and respond it's just not really workable. I would say I've never lied to a parent, and I don't think that teachers should be lying to parents or withholding information, but I think that standard is just difficult for a teacher to implement, and it's going to cause the problems that the people before me mentioned. And I also just think that this bill interjects teachers into the parent and child relationship in a way that will be uncomfortable for teachers, parents, and children. That teachers can have a role in facilitating that type of honest conversation among parents and children, but this bill just unfortunately doesn't do that. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Anne Marie Banfield.
Good morning, Anne Marie Banfield. I'm a parental rights advocate in New Hampshire, education researcher focused on excellence in education. I do come here in support of this bill. I think this bill is needed, and it's really primarily, I think, the reason that it's being introduced or has been introduced in the past is because of the JBAB policy that the New Hampshire School Boards Association put forth years ago, where it required teachers to withhold information from parents. And so we saw that pop up in many schools. Not all schools adopted the policy, but many did. And so that resulted in a lawsuit in Manchester by a parent who had asked about her child using a different name at school. And according to the policy, they could not provide that parent with honest information. Now, that parent is a teacher in another school district. So I think it's important to understand that teachers, I think, in general, are parents, and they expect honesty and they expect to not have information withheld from them. And that's what we found. I mean, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. I also think that these kinds of situations, especially this lawsuit, results in a lot of people leaving the public schools. So if you are against school choice, then we need to start looking at ways to keep families in the public schools. And that's what a lot of times I come here saying, look, we've got a problem. If this parent took her child out of the Manchester schools and moved that child to another school, that's the result of some of these things that are going on. So if you want people to stay in the public schools, it's got to be family friendly. It's got to be parent friendly. It cannot be anti-parent. And that's what happened with that particular policy. That policy did not allow for due process. We allow for due process for teachers. So I'm glad that it does have a provision in here that if a child is in a situation where there is risk, that there is due process, that you are going to report this to authorities if you cannot be honest with the parent. We hear about, well, this could possibly stop a teacher from talking to a child or something like that. First of all, if anybody is talking to a child on anything mental health, on anything mentally health related, federal law requires parental consent on that. ESSA requires parental consent on any mental health services or mental health assessments. So they should be going to the parent in the first place if there's anything mental health related. And then I think that's it. That is it. Thank you for paying
Thank you.
attention to that.
Any questions by the committee members? Senator Ursula.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Banfield, for taking my question. What was the outcome of that lawsuit that you were referring to in making your case to support this bill?
The lawsuit was in favor of the school policy that had been adjusted while the lawsuit was taking place. But at that Supreme Court hearing, the attorney said, and I was sitting there because I was at the Supreme Court at the time. The attorney said, if you don't like it, basically, parents, you can leave. Now, what do you think that's telling people in the state? If you don't like this anti-parent kind of position in these schools, you can leave. Okay, you can take it to the Supreme Court if you want, but people are going to leave, and this parent did leave. And I don't know how many others, but that particular policy, I can tell you, drove that family out.
Can I follow up?
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Banfield. Would you believe that Supreme Court Justice Gordon MacDonald said the policy does not restrict a parent's ability to learn information from other sources, including from the child? The policy does not encourage students to hide information from their parents or prevents students from sharing information.
Yes, and I read the original policy when it first came out, and it specifically says not to tell the parent. So I do understand that the policy was changed midway through the court proceedings when it went to the first court and then when it went to the Supreme Court. I do understand that. But here's the thing. Everybody in the school is going to know about this child. Everybody in the school, they're changing their name, so we're not going to tell the parent. The parent's not the one that's going to be told. Well, everybody else gets to know. I mean, kids know in the class. Kids probably go home and tell their parents. Neighbors talk about it, but the person who doesn't get to know is the parent. I'm just saying that leads to families leaving school. So if you don't support school choice, I'm telling you, this is what drives a lot of people out. I know this. I've been doing this for 20 years. I can tell you that many parents leave the school district.
Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah Tyrrell. Need to be gone by 11, she says here. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
You have
Members, thank you.
microphone?
Sorry, I'm on the wrong side. Good morning, committee members. Thank you for taking the time to hear testimony this morning. My name is Sarah Terrell. I'm a lifelong resident of New Hampshire and the proud parent of 2 wonderful children. My son is 18 and thriving in his first year of college. My daughter is 16 and a dedicated high school sophomore. I'm here today because I have serious concerns about the Honesty and Transparency in Education Act. At its core, this bill assumes that parents and schools are at odds, that they require government micromanagement to work together effectively. But that simply isn't true. Parents and educators already collaborate every day to support children's learning and well-being. This bill does not strengthen those relationships, it undermines them. More specifically, I'm deeply troubled by the provisions that could force schools to disclose a student's LGBTQ identity before they are ready. When my daughter came out to me, it was a moment of immense trust and vulnerability. I could see the anxiety on her face. Even though she had no reason to doubt our love, she was still afraid of how her father or I might react. That moment belonged to her and to our family. If someone at her school had taken that decision away from her, I would have been devastated. No one, especially a child, should be forced to reveal something so personal before they are ready. This act claims to protect parental rights, but at what cost? It disregards the rights and dignity of the very children it claims to serve. Not all students are lucky enough to have supportive families. For some, being outed could mean rejection, homelessness, or even danger. The government should not be in the business of putting vulnerable kids at risk. I urge you to listen to the voices of parents, teachers, and students who know firsthand that collaboration, not government overreach, is what truly benefits children. This bill is unnecessary, harmful, and dangerous. As a former CPSW for DCYF, I can also tell you that our current provision in 169C does not allow for the type of reporting that this bill lists. This bill says that if you have a concern of future harm, you should call and report to central intake. However, central intake cannot screen in a concern of something that might happen. They can only screen in a concern of something that has happened. So the provision in the bill that says anybody that has a concern should call, and that's how we're going to protect kids, it won't work unless you change 169C. Please vote ITL on SB 96. Thank you. Happy to take questions if you have any.
Questions from committee members?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brian Hawkins. Over. Morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my testimony. For the record, Brian Hawkins, representing NEA New Hampshire. We represent over 17,000 educators across the state. We're here in opposition to Senate Bill 96, which, at least as I read it, other than the date change, was the same bill that failed last year. The the same reasons we oppose the bill today. I agree with some of the previous testimony that indicated that, you know, overall this, I think, sends a bad message that there's somehow this widespread fractured relationship between educators and parents. I think there is a solid relationship between educators and parents in the state of New Hampshire. So what really is this legislation accomplishing? As I mentioned, if educators welcome discussion and questions about how their child is doing in their class from parents, if there's an answer to a question given by a teacher that's somehow unsatisfactory to a parent of a student, especially in the area outlined in school district policy, then that's the sort of issue that ought to be addressed with the principal of the school or possibly the superintendent. At the school district level, it's principals and administrators who are responsible for enforcing school board policies and managing school employees. They would be the ones who would be directing or guiding staff if there's a certain type of question that ought to be run through a school principal or possibly require an attorney depending on the nature of the question. However, if a school board is following the school policy and a parent doesn't agree with the policy, it's not the school employee, which this bill specifically targets, that has the latitude to disobey that policy or directive by their supervisor. This bill seems to create a parallel and contradictory process and penalties to the ones established by the local school board and possibly even employment agreements. So two things I'll just hone in on. First, some questions that we have. Who is the arbiter of what material information is, or whether an inquiry was answered completely or not? That's not clear in the bill. During the Senate hearing last year, the Department of Education testified that the honestly and completely standard was subjective and would be difficult to enforce. And the same language, as has been noted, is here in Senate Bill 96, as was in Senate Bill 341. Secondly, the completely and honestly to the extent permitted by state or federal law is also concerning regarding the position the educator's placed here. This forces the educator to juggle some competing interests, determining first what's material, and then what is a complete answer, and whether too much detail violates a state or federal law that they may or may not be aware of. And then they have to make that determination about whether a complete disclosure might risk the student's safety. And then you add to that pressure the need to respond in the statutorily prescribed 10-day period without any reasonable parameters, any room for reasonable parameters to be established. These concerns, the concerns we have about this bill and inquiries fall under, again, as I stated earlier, what may be employment protocols that educators are used to following. Since the law puts all of the onus on the licensed educator receiving the inquiry, is the school district going to support them if they believe that if the educator believes they responded completely and honestly, but as someone mentioned earlier, forgot to include something that arguably should have been included in the educator's written response, and then the family turns around and sues the school district? Is the district going to back the credential holder if they seek district input and the administration or their attorney doesn't get back to the educator within the 10 business days, and then the educator misses the deadline? So in summary, we think the bill sets up a confusing and intimidating process for the educator in a school and will not serve students in furthering their education. This is similar to some previous legislation that we talked about in the Educator Shortage Committee, where you have some vague laws and standards that are accompanied by the potential of losing your license. And so with that, I'll close my testimony, and I do have some written testimony to hand in. I tried not to read it all, but happy to take any questions.
Questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it Pasha Roberts? Turn on the mic, please.
Good morning, honorable members of the Education Committee. I'm Pasha Roberts. I live in Wilmot, New Hampshire, and I'm on the board of 603 Equality, and I'm speaking against SB 96. I think we all know and treasure the parents who are deeply involved in their children's well-being and education. They ask questions, they're curious, they're supportive, they have boundaries, and they talk with their kids, and they're engaged positively. So thank you to those parents. There's a vast middle ground, but then there's another kind of parent where the parents are more difficult. There can be rigidity, anger, abuse, neglect, or substance problems. In many cases, the families from the second group rely on high control methods to maintain their status quo. They are not asking questions in order to support their children. It is to punish and to control. Kids in these environments are endangered by disclosures of mental, emotional, or physical health. We are in a full-blown moral panic around gender in this country, making disclosure of pronouns, names, or partners especially dangerous. I worked for years in the Massachusetts Child Abuse Hotline, have educated in schools to prevent child sexual abuse, and as an advanced EMT in New London Hospital in Wilmot, I was a mandated reporter. But most of my experience in this category comes from being a survivor. I was sexually abused by both parents and went through my first year of high school being actively abused. The release of any variant on my part, especially mental health or gender, would have made things go nuclear. I survived because of this insulation. I am not alone in this. When I was living through this, there was a very high premium on compartmentalization. Kids need that safe bubble that good teachers, good policies, and good laws provide. So, many of you may be from this first group of parents and cannot understand the danger about which I speak. That's good. But please be aware that not all parents are like you. Some of these questions are not innocent. These children are in danger. There are notable cases of beatings and suicide resulting from improper disclosure. This bill puts children at risk. I emphatically encourage you to vote this bill, ITL. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
There's one.
Oh, you said, okay, you have to raise, okay. Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pasha, for coming to testify. As a survivor of childhood abuse, thank you for sharing your testimony. And if this law were in place when you were in middle school and high school, what would the consequences be for a teacher disclosing who you were able to be as a student?
For me, any kind of disclosure in that department of mental health or behavior or gender would have, like as I said in the testimony, would have made things go nuclear. It would be, and I try, kids like me try to look as normal as possible, as safe as possible. A teacher or staff may not ever know that this kind of thing is going on inside the home, which is why this bill is so dangerous. Just the clause for safety that is there is too high of a bar. So that's why I encourage you to make this bill ITL.
Thank you.
Any more? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
David Trumbull.
David Trumbull?
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and committee members. My name is David Trumbull. I'm from the town of Ware, and I oppose this bill. I'd like to offer two reasons for you to consider. First, is generally that children should be allowed to live honestly and have a say in matters about their own life. They should be able to be themselves, talk openly with trusted people. That in a school could be a coach, a nurse, a counselor, or a teacher, or a para. They should have a say in decisions about their own life. This bill would remove the student's voice from the discussion. That's not honesty when one person's voice is excluded. The bill uses the law to silence the honest and authentic life of teenagers. The bill creates a legal paradigm in which the parents have 100% control and power over their children until they're 18 when it comes to these matters of discussion. Certainly, parents have complete control over a 5-year-old, but not over children who are 15 or 16 or 17. This runs contrary to common sense. The bill also runs counter to longstanding New Hampshire law that recognizes the right of teenagers to be a part of the process of decisions about their own life. I'll offer you 2 examples. One is divorce. By the age of 13 or 14, the wishes of the children are given great weight by the court system under numerous New Hampshire Supreme Court decisions. Chief Judge King, in a 1986 case, said common sense tells us that a child, though still a minor, will often be sufficiently mature to play a large part in deciding that he needs a different custodial parent. Chief Judge Duggan wrote in 2005, minors have rights which they can assert themselves in their own best interest without the involvement of their parents. In this case, a minor had a right to privacy, enabling them to keep their father from seeing their mental health records. A second example would be in special education. It's not uncommon for children who receive special ed to attend their own IEP meetings by the time they're in the 8th grade. The U.S. Department of Education Guide to IEP writes, more and more students are participating in and even leading their own IEP meetings. This allows them to have a strong voice in their own education and can teach them a great deal about self-advocacy and self-determination. The second concern I have with the bill is just on the example of homelessness. And I understand that Senator Lang said if a teacher feels that a child is going to be endangered, then the teacher or the para or the coach would not have to be completely honest with the parent in that situation about a child's LGBTQ status. But it's not clear whether or not that just means would the parent beat the child up, or what if the parent says, I stop supporting you, I won't feed you, I won't help you go to college, or you can't stay under my roof, go find someplace else to live. It's not a, oh, gee, maybe that might happen sort of thing. It actually happens quite a bit. The Trevor Project indicates that 14% of LGBTQ youth reported they had slept away from parents or caregivers because they were kicked out of or abandoned. It's not uncommon in this situation. So what does the bill do in that case? If a teacher says, child talks to them and says, I'm trying to deal with what's going on at home. My dad doesn't really understand me. My mom does get me. Dad comes and says, tell me honestly what's going on. If the teacher tells them, the child has already told the teacher, I'm afraid I'll be thrown out of the house. Does that satisfy the requirements of the statute? Does the teacher, if they fear that, have to file a, I think it's RSA 169 petition with the state under abuse and neglect? And abuse and neglect petitions cannot be filed or accepted or proven with potential evidence of maybe something down the road. There has to be actual evidence. So I would say probably it wouldn't be accepted. But if they do file it, you now not only have the parent who's going to throw their child out, you've ruined that relationship between that parent and child forever, because now the parent is not just dealing with the relationship with the child and saying, oh, wow, my child is LGBTQ. I didn't know that. Now they are being investigated by the state for abuse and neglect, because once you file that petition, they have to begin the whole process of an intake and an investigation. So the bill doesn't help families. I would say it hurts families, and it doesn't help children. Children should have a voice in their own life. Thank you.
Any questions by the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deborah House.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, Chairman Ward and members of the Senate Education Committee. It's good to see you again. My name is Deborah Howes. I am the president of the American Federation of Teachers, and I'm here to testify against Senate Bill 96. If this bill said school districts had to adopt a policy that school staff had to report on student academics, student behavior, following school rules, whether they have friends at school, in response to parent questions within 10 days in writing, accurately and completely. We would think it was a good bill and helpful to forming the partnerships that parents and school staff should have in the best interest of children. That would actually be a reasonable bill requiring that kind of policy in districts. This bill isn't what I just described. It does not foster a good working partnership in the best interest of children. This bill has unclear terms in it. It could require a surveillance state in our schools, and it's going to lead to adverse learning environments. By unclear terms, I mean it calls for staff to report out on material information. How am I going to know what every parent considers material information about their child ahead of time so they make note of it, observe it, and keep track of it? It says, I have to report completely and honestly on everything. That seems simple, but by completely and honestly, do I have to tell you everything a student has told me? Everything I have noticed? Do I have to go out of my way to observe things that are subjective? Do I have to notice a change in dress, a change in hairstyle? Because maybe a parent thinks that is materially important. Do I have to notice that Samantha now wants to be called Sam, and do I have to investigate that in case a parent thinks that's materially important? Maybe it's just someone who prefers a shorter name. I know I go by Deb instead of Deborah, but that's just because I like a shorter name. Do I have to report what one student says about another student? What if I have no idea whether it's true or not? What if that's someone's idea of a joke, or students trying to bully another student? This can really open a can of worms. If you do this, students will not feel comfortable learning in their schools because you will have teachers so busy trying to figure out what parents might want reported out to them beyond just how the student is doing academically, whether they're following the school rules, whether they generally are getting along with their peers and generally seem happy in schools. The stuff you would find in a report card that you would talk about in a parent-teacher conference. Teachers will be so busy trying to keep track of all these things they might be required to report on that might be considered materially important. And if they aren't complete and honest about it, they're threatened with being reported to the State Board of Ed on a code of conduct violation, which of course threatens your livelihood. This bill gets in the way of creating good working relationships between parents and teachers, creating good learning environments in our schools. We really urge you to find this bill inexpedient to legislate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yep.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you for taking my question, and thank you, Madam Chair. So I just am not interpreting this bill the way that you are. So maybe you can give me some clarity here, because it states that this would be in response to a written request by a parent. So this is going to be a parameter that parents are like, I've noticed something happening at home. I'd like to reach out to the teacher and ask them, if they're seeing this as well. There are parameters here. This isn't documenting. My interpretation is not that it's documenting everything that a student does, but also, wouldn't you agree that the completely and honestly part sort of gets rid of that concern that you have? Because if you're answering something honestly to the best of your memory, that would be considered completely. And they do not. This isn't about teachers having journals of each child. This is if a parent has a particular concern, reaching out to the school and expecting a response from that teacher. Would you agree with that?
If you want it to have parameters, you need to have actual measurable parameters like academic performance, like following school rules, like observed interaction with peers in the classroom, things that you would expect a teacher to notice in the course of doing their actual job of teaching. So put those parameters in the bill.
Do you see anything in that bill that restricts parents from requesting that particular information? I think there's
There's nothing that restricts asking for that information, but there's also nothing that restricts asking for other information. And that's the concern. The concern is with the completely and honestly and the threat of turning you over for an investigation if you fail to notice something a parent considers material information. It is too open-ended, too vague, and oh my goodness, we might have another unconstitutionally vague law. That's really a bad habit.
Thank you.
Any other? Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hi. Thorpe. Troop.
What was the name?
TYS, and I think it says THOUP, Ties, Troops.
Tice Thorpe? Tice Tomps?
Try Tice.
Tice Tom.
Hi, my name is Ty Thompson. My pronouns are they, them.
Okay.
I'm sorry for my scrawly handwriting and you couldn't read my name. I'm here in opposition of SB 96. 40 years ago, I sat in my English class of my sophomore year of high school with Mr. Harrington. He introduced the idea of literature and writing as having the common exploration of the answers to life's important questions. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? We started a group discussion. How do you answer the question, who am I? And in the course of the discussion, we also went on to think about things like, how do you know where you stop and another person begins? We talked about it not only from the standpoint of the molecules of our bodies, but the idea of values and interests and character traits that we each have as part of our sense of self. Ultimately, it became a conversation about connection with others and maintaining self in the midst of boundaries and lived expression of self. It was heady stuff for a 15-year-old, and it has stayed in my mind as a crucial learning experience for 40 years. This is a teacher who truly challenged me, believed in my capacity to know and think, and supported my autonomy by expecting and respecting my voice in ways I had never experienced. This is a teacher I trusted and looked to as a mentor. And it's the end of that story. It's a really good one. He made a profound difference in my life. All kids can only hope to have a teacher of this type in their life. It is the job of youth to build understanding of self, to experience and explore autonomy and connection, to practice critical thinking, and to grow their voice in the world, and to do so in absence of parents and guardians. This is how we become adults. It is not the job of teachers to report on this voice of the emerging self to parents, as young people inevitably share their thoughts with trusted adults around them. Exceptions to this include voicing thoughts of harm to others, thoughts of harm to self, or the ways that they use their voice to harm people while they are at school. There are already mandated reporting laws on the books that cover these types of things and disciplinary strategies in schools that involve parents when students are causing harm to others with their voice. Young people coming to know themselves and identifying as part of the LGBTQIA community are not inherently a risk of harm or harming others. The risk of harm is generally related to the suppression of voice, abandonment, or violence in the home from disclosure to family members who are not safe or accepting. These risks are unfortunately all too real. Even when families are loving and have capacity for acceptance, the ability to practice the language used to express oneself is so important in navigating vulnerable conversations and remaining in connections with one another. As adults, we practice this all the time with trusted friends before we have vulnerable conversations with those that we love most. For children, those primary relationships are imperative for their safety and well-being, and it makes sense that kids want to protect those relationships and choose when they are able to disclose to their parents those things that feel most important to those relationships. We do a disservice to our young people when we remove the autonomy and control surrounding the ability to choose how to share these important aspects of self with those they love and create an atmosphere of censorship and fear of exposure in school settings. Similarly, we place teachers in untenable situations where they must report to parents or face consequences. We expect our young people to have increasing responsibility for themselves. We do no one a service by demanding that the schools report on all conversations with young people. This is simply an extension of fear and control. Teachers' jobs are hard enough. This legislation is unrealistic at best and unsafe at worst. So I urge you to vote ITL.
Thank you. Questions from committee members?
Thank you for
Seeing
hearing
none,
me.
thank you. Amelia Thompson.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Amelia Thompson, and I'm a constituent from Newmarket, New Hampshire. I was born into a family of teachers, and that's why I want to speak about this bill. You know, it takes a village to raise a child. I think we can all agree on that. And how I'm feeling about this bill is that it's saying only the parent can raise the child. I feel like if the parent feels that way, they can homeschool, right? That's an option for them. This is taking away the teacher's ability to decide if telling a parent important information about a kid that they divulged to this trusted adult. I feel like it's taking away the teacher's ability to decide if that's going to hurt the kid, especially if the kid is saying, like, my parents don't need to know this. It's going to hurt me if my parents know this. Don't tell them. It's taking away the village. It's taking away every trusted adult from these children besides their parents, and I think it's cruel. The other side of it is that I think that this would be very hard to enforce. Coming from a family of teachers, they have 10,000 things to do every day. They aren't able to devote their attention to eavesdropping on what these students are saying and how they're presenting themselves. And if they miss something, they have to face suspension on their first offense for failing to notice that something is going on with this kid. So I think that the punishments are too high. I think that what's being asked of the teachers is too much. And I'm also concerned that the financial impact section of this bill said 0. We all know that it's not going to be 0 because of how much was written about how this would be fought in court and that teachers need to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's an impact to this, and I wish that this committee would listen to the teachers and listen to the students and realize that it's not so simple as this kid has a problem, I have to tell their parent. There are certain situations where that might be true if there's imminent harm that's going to come to the student, but for the majority of things that a student would divulge to their teacher out of just looking for a trusted adult, just looking for somebody to listen to them, it's not something that you need to go and tattle to the parent right away for the majority of cases. So thank you for listening to me about this. I hope that you'll also, again, listen to teachers and students and try to think about the impact of this, not just the intent of the bill, but what will actually happen if it passes. All right? Because it's not the same thing. The intent and what will actually happen are very, very different. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And wait a minute. Wait.
Oh, I've never gotten asked questions before.
Any questions by any committee members? Seeing none, thank you.
I appreciate that. Have a great day.
Linz Jacobs.
Linz?
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Linz Jakehouse, and I am a co-founder of 603 Equality, a statewide organization that advocates for LGBTQ plus people. I oppose SB 96. All students should have the freedom to learn and find a trusted adult at home, especially if their home life is challenging. But for several years now, those opposed to LGBTQ plus rights have been twisting the idea of parental rights to try to force teachers to allow parents to micromanage curriculum and forcibly out LGBTQ plus students. SB 96 says anyone who works in a public school must answer, quote, honestly and completely, unquote, to inquiries by parents about their students. This high standard would require an enormous amount of record keeping, requiring anyone who works inside a school building to either record or remember everything they might overhear in a school day. If you're serious about preventing lies, I urge you to amend this bill to say plainly, teachers shouldn't lie to parents rather than create a difficult learning environment in which overheard conversations may be required reporting and may not provide full context. While this bill does not directly single out transgender students, I oppose the language in this bill that would fail to protect many students who would face abuse or neglect if educators were forced to disclose sensitive information, like a student's LGBTQ plus or questioning status. I also, fortunately, parental rights are already well established in the law. We must come together and oppose this overreach into our schools, especially when it harms vulnerable young people. I asked the committee to examine how the language will impact LGBTQ plus students who are not ready to come out to their parents and who may face dire consequences at home. Many conversations between a student and trusted teacher or other school employee might look like this. The student says, I'm gay, or I think I might be trans. The teacher says, thank you for telling me. Have you told your parents? The student says, I don't feel safe doing that. I know my parents believe being gay or trans is wrong, or I'm not sure if I'm ready for that conversation yet. The teacher says, it's okay to not be sure, or it's okay to come out on your own timeline. If my parent had asked the teacher directly, it should be okay for the teacher to say, you should ask your child directly and not get in the way of the sensitive family conversation. That's how my conversation with my favorite high school teacher went when I knew it wasn't safe to come out to my father, who believes being LGBTQ is a sin. That conversation should not be considered a violation of parental rights. A teacher could overhear a student in the hall tell a friend in the hall that they want to try out new pronouns, which may or may not mean they're transgender. A parent who believes being transgender is wrong could claim that any level of knowledge that a student might be questioning should be immediately reported to them if they fundamentally disagree with who their child is. Their child is still LGBTQ+, whether that parent is ready to accept this or not. And unfortunately, some young people are still abused, neglected, or even kicked out of their homes just for being LGBTQ. 2 years ago, when another bill similar to this was being heard, Waypoint gave testimony that 25% of the young people in their shelters were LGBTQ. This bill only limits parental rights when there is a significantly raised bar than what is currently used to determine cases of abuse and neglect. The bill reads, if in such a good faith determination of the credential holder, such complete and honest response to a request would put the student in imminent risk of physical harm, abuse, or neglect, such credential holder shall file a report with DHHS within 48 hours of such determination in accordance with RSA insert number here, and may withhold only the information that creates the risk. This appears to be a higher legal standard than what the Office of the Child Advocate has stated that they use. They use a preponderance of the evidence. This bill, as written, puts LGBTQ+ students at risk. I urge the committee to amend the language to remove this harm or to cast an inexpedient to legislate vote for the bill. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you. Mackenzie. That's what it is, like Mackenzie. Like Wentz. That's the. What's your last name?
West?
West?
Yeah, W-E-S-T.
W-E-S-T? Okay. Mackenzie is your first name, though?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hello, members of the committee. My name is Mackenzie West, and I am here to oppose Senate Bill 96. Let me tell you about myself. I grew up in southern Vermont in a family of conservative Southern Baptist Christians. Bigotry in my family wasn't overt. My family, having never really had to confront their own prejudice, was more insidious about their hatred. A comment here, eyes of daggers there, undermining others My family never went out of their way to openly discriminate. It was the silent and subtle way of letting others know that they were in fact others, and they were not welcome. Going to church, I was taught to hate myself, that being who I am was a sin, and that there was no place for people like me. Again, it wasn't the outwardly bigoted position that's easy to point to. It was a systematic programming over years that consumed my confidence, my self-worth, and my childhood. The only place that I felt safe was in school, among the kind and compassionate teachers that showed me that another way was possible. I was deeply closeted until I was 24 because I had the courage to transition, and there wasn't long I could hide it. I relied on my family for support just to live, like so many do. When I came out to my family, I did so in a public place, one-on-one, with a gun tucked in my coat, fearing for my safety, a bag packed to go, and a car to go, ready to go anywhere but here. I took a risk not knowing what I was going to do, but I had half a plan and the resources younger kids do not. The only support I had, being a more feminine boy in my childhood, was from my teachers, and they were the ones who had showed me that a better world was possible. I did not have the courage that I do now when I was a child, but many kids do. Many are able to come out in school and among friends, and this bill would force teachers to out kids to their parents when it may be unsafe to do so, and when repercussions could be harmful and life-changing. We need to keep schools safe, where kids can be kids. Teachers continue to have discretion, not legal obligation. Kids need to be able to come out on their own when they feel safe to do so. I urge you to vote ITL on this bill.
Thank you. Questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. One more. Sarah Smith.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Smith. I live in Pembroke, New Hampshire. I am a retired public school teacher, and I am here in opposition to this bill. I think, I think it's been pointed out already that the vagueness of the language is really troubling. It's really hard to know how to follow something that's this vague. I'm concerned, I should also say I'm a Quaker, and that means that, as you know, Quakers view honesty as a core principle. In fact, in New Hampshire law, Quakers are not required to take oaths. So everything we say, we believe that we should be truthful in everything that we say. So I don't quibble with the truthfulness of this law, but I'm concerned that there are just I'm concerned with the way it treats children. Number one, because I believe that children are. They're basically children of God. They're fully formed at birth. They have that of God of them, just like anyone else. And their opinions matter and are as valid. And so I wouldn't, they're as valid as what their parents think. And when we start as educators, we're trying to teach children to think on their own, frankly. And so that the idea that somehow something that they express could be then reported back to their parents, who might disagree for any number of reasons, is kind of antithetical to me as a teacher. Also, I think there is a certain amount of trust that teachers develop with their students. I was a special ed and Title I teacher. Sometimes I was working one-on-one with a student. And I can remember one time I worked with a student who was, people were having trouble with him, but I developed a rapport with him, and I always checked with him how he was doing, and trying, I was trying to understand why he was having such behavioral difficulties, and sometimes he talked to me about that. I never found out exactly why, but he said some things that made me think that something really was going on, and I didn't want to break that trust. He asked me not to say what he said, and I didn't. Because there was nothing to report at that point, but I was hoping that at some point I would find out what the root of his problem was, and I suspect it had something to do with his mother, but that's all I know. So, at what point do you draw that line? This is a really difficult thing to decide sometimes, and so this kind of vague wording about reporting anything that's said is just can really set kids up for a really difficult situation, and we need to honor their needs as well, to be able to speak freely and develop their own ideas, and not have this kind of speech chilling kind of bill in front of us.
Any questions from committee members? I just have one question for you. This bill.
You have to speak up because the sound system is not working very well here, and I'm not getting any sound from that.
Can you hear me now?
You still sound like you're talking to without the microphone.
Turns her microphone off, her speaker will turn on. Hers will.
Ma'am, if
I
you turn on your microphone, the speaker.
When I talk, I am talking this far away from the microphone.
And then you can hear.
Can you hear me now? Okay. No.
So basic accommodation. I'm a special ed.
Wait a minute,
But we don't normally approach the chair of the committee
Would you
members.
give that
Try to give it to
the gentleman over
I
there?
don't want anyone else to touch my mic.
Okay, I will not ask the question. I'm not going
All
to
right.
touch it.
Well,
I'm not going to touch
we
it.
still have to maintain decorum, and we understand you don't want him to touch it. We didn't know that when it was brought up, but we didn't. Normally we pass things up to committee. That's just the decorum and practice in every committee. No disrespect was meant by that.
I withdraw my question. Anybody else? Thank you for your testimony. Now, this is the end of what I have listed, the people who have listed here. Is there anybody in the audience who likes to speak, who has to speak to this question, to this bill? If not, this ends the testimony on Senate Bill 96. Here. School bullying, okay. Well, what's his name, West? We're going to open up the hearing on Senate Bill 210, and our prime sponsor is here, Senator Fenton.
It's good to be home. Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Senator Donovan Fenton, and I represent District 10. I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 210, which would establish a study committee on school bullying. We know that bullying is a serious issue that affects students across New Hampshire. When bullying occurs, it can have devastating consequences on a child's well-being, their academic success, and their ability to feel safe in a school environment. Recent events in Keene have brought this issue to the forefront, with community members expressing deep concerns about whether schools are doing enough to prevent and address bullying. While we cannot make assumptions about the circumstances surrounding any specific tragedy, it is clear that we must do more to ensure that every child feels safe and supported in school. This bill creates a committee to take a deeper look at school bullying in our state, identify best practices for prevention, and consider whether additional legislative action is needed. This is not just about assigning blame, but rather about ensuring that our schools have the resources, policies, and training necessary to protect our students. The importance of this work cannot be overstated. Across the country, we have seen the profound and sometimes tragic impact of bullying, and we must take proactive approach in New Hampshire to understand the scope of the issue and explore meaningful solutions. I urge the committee to support this legislation, to take steps to protect our students and foster safer, more inclusive learning environments. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions by committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'm going to head back to committee now, too. So thank you, guys.
Anne-Marie Banfield.
For the record, Anne Marie Banfield, parental rights advocate, education researcher. Members of the committee, thank you for listening to my testimony. I signed in neutral, but I would say I'm more of a supporter of this bill. I just think it needs to be amended. I don't think that the people listed are enough. I think you need to actually hear from the families, many of which have pulled their kids out of the public school because of bullying. I think you need to hear from them. I think they're the ones that are probably the most important people to have on this committee. I would say if you're looking for parents like that, you go directly to the executive director of the Children's Scholarship Fund, because if you've ever listened to an EFA hearing, you are going to hear from parents after parent after parent after parent who describes the bullying that happened to their child and how things were not handled in that school. So I think if you really want to get to the heart of this issue, you've got to listen to these parents, because the administrators a lot of times weren't listening to them. And the sponsor of the bill really hit on it when he said that, you know, a lot of this is going ignored. And he brought up Keene, what's going on in Keene. Teachers left the school a few years ago, and the crux of the issue was the behavior that was out of control in that school. Parents showed up for a meeting, teachers were there, everybody was talking about why this is happening in the schools. So I think that we need to get to the bottom of this. Again, I'm going to bring this up. If you really oppose school choice and EFAs, you better start listening to these families who are leaving the public schools. This shocks me that no public school has an exit interview. Why are you leaving? Let's talk to the school board about this. It's almost like they don't care. It's almost like they don't care that people are leaving in droves. So I support this bill because I'm hoping that this is the kind of bipartisan action that will get to the bottom of what is going on, why this is being ignored, why is this happening in today's age, where we should be able to find out what's going on and fix it. And I'm sad to say that sometimes this is going to have to come from the state level. I would hope that this could come from the local schools, but we're hearing from too many of these families at these EFA hearings saying, this is what happened, nothing was done. So yeah, I do think that, I hope that this is the kind of legislation that will bring out those answers. But I think you need to add Stephen Berwick from the DOE. Why not have him on the committee? He gets calls from parents all the time. I send them to him. Call him, report it to him, because they're not getting action. So I think that is it.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. So back in 2018, Governor Sununu had a task force on school safety, which included bullying and cyberbullying. The task force put out recommendations for the schools. It seems like these have not been enforced. I think this comes down to the administration. as someone in my community that is an advocate for school choice, I get calls weekly from parents whose children are being bullied, and the administrators
Yes.
are not doing anything about it. So how would do you think this has enough teeth in it to do anything to address the actual, and we know kids are being bullied, right? What we don't know is why the administrators aren't backing up teachers in the classroom and why they are not enforcing the laws that are already on the books. Do you think this has enough teeth to do anything about that, or do we need a different piece of legislation to actually address what's happening?
The last change to the law added some teeth. If you recall, there was no right of action in the bullying bill, and then they added it. So if you are, and I don't know the exact terminology, but I sat in on the hearings. I supported the bill because there was some teeth to that bill. Like if the administrators are actively ignoring it, parents can now sue. Before, if you sued, you lost. If the administrators were neglectful. Now that's the case. I'm just wondering, I wonder, first of all, if parents have the ability to sue. That takes money. And if you lose, you're out of pocket. So I think the teeth that are in there, while I supported that, I just wonder if parents feel like, you know what, this is going to cost me an arm and a leg with an attorney. And so my hope is that this bill will draw that out. You will get that kind of information. That's why I think you need to get the parents on here and the parents telling you why didn't you sue them? Because that is now a right of action in our current law. Why didn't you sue them? Why, what prevented you? Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't know that they could sue. So I think you're right. There has to be some teeth. I think that maybe this committee that's a discussion to have with this committee. But I think you need to have people on here that really know what's going on, what happened to them. And I think if you bring one or two on, I'm not sure you're going to get a wide range. You could probably need people from different districts. That's why, I would just say add those people. Stephen Berwick from the DOE might be a good resource. I'm just looking for good people that could offer you that kind of information to get to the root of the problem.
I have a follow-up.
Follow-up.
Thank you. So the other thing on here, I would you agree that the bullying in the classroom currently goes both ways? Teachers are also being bullied. Would you be?
Oh,
do you think
yes.
that should be included in this? It contributes completely to the environment in the school altogether.
That's actually a really good point that I hadn't thought of, but you're absolutely right. I think that's what drove some of those teachers out in Keene was that they had become, I don't know if they become the targets, but we know nationwide that has happened, and that has driven a lot of these teachers out of the teaching profession. They're not getting backup. And I do think, to be honest with you, there was a law passed not too long ago. Oh gosh, it's been a few years. I'm sorry about that. Where it was almost like we're trying to restrict the administrators also with suspensions. We want to lower suspension rates. Well, of course we want to lower suspension rates. Who doesn't? But when you put that in law, then it's kind of like, well, I don't want to suspend them. So you got to think about, I think, bringing in the whole picture. I'd be happy to serve on a committee like this and bring that information to the committee, that let's look at current laws also that might be pushing administrators to not bring in consequences, because I think there's consequences that are not happening now in our schools, that given these, any kind of child that will push boundaries. Why not push boundaries when I can get away with it? While, I go down to the school counselor, teacher tells me, send a kid out, who's being a disruptive in the classroom. He comes back with a lollipop or, a treat. This is what I hear from teachers too. So yeah, I think you need to get to the root of the problem. I don't know if I support this. I just want it to be where it's an honest discussion. And so I think it just needs to be amended to include that, if you understand me.
Questions? Seeing none,
Okay,
thank you very
thank you.
much. Mackenzie West. Welcome back. A different bill.
Yes. Hello, members of the community. Once again, I am here to support Senate Bill 210. I don't have much prepared for this, but we know that queer and marginalized populations face higher bullying in school, and we know how these outcomes generally tend to go with higher rates of depression and suicide and stuff like that. Oftentimes we find that the legislation doesn't know much about what is going on and stuff like that. So I support this bill in investigating more of the issues that younger people face and to come up with the solutions that focus less on punishment and how that perpetuates the cycles of violence, but how we can find better solutions to avoid the cycles that we often find ourselves stuck in these schools.
Okay, thank you. Questions by committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Now we have Linz Jacobs.
Hello, members of the committee. I'm in support of the idea of a study committee to study school bullying because we know that LGBTQ plus young people experience higher rates of bullying in school than their non-LGBTQ peers do. Of course, we don't want anyone to experience bullying. But at the same time, we know that harsh punishments for bullies are not useful tools to end cycles of harm. So I would encourage this committee to take that into account when forming the study committee and to use the study committee to look at restorative justice approaches to bullying. While I'm not an expert on restorative justice, I know that restorative justice is more productive in resolving community issues and disagreements than punitive measures. Additionally, people must willingly participate in restorative justice practices for it to work. And the same restorative justice practices must apply to everyone to hold the entire community accountable. The Center for Justice and Reconciliation defines restorative justice as an approach to resolving conflict that, quote, repairs the harm caused by a crime instead of applying punitive measures like detention, suspension, or expulsion. Restorative justice practices can include a facilitation between offender and victim, peer mediation and conflict resolution circles, hosting dialogue circles, and student integration following suspension. For restorative justice to work, students must trust the process. This is from the Hetchinger report. I'll email testimony with these links. If successful, it allows everyone within the community to be held accountable to each other. But that can only happen if people are not forced and participate willingly. In peer mediation circles, students who may get into a fight, for example, quote, talk it out, unquote, amongst each other in hopes of intervening before the issue becomes an even bigger problem. In dialogue circles, students sit in a large circular shape facing one another. Here they can check in with each other, settle minor disputes, and perhaps even hold academic interventions. Even after a student has done a suspendable offense, restorative justice can allow for integration through hosting circles with parents, school administrators, and the student to find the best path forward in school. Restorative justice has also been proven to prevent students from falling into the school to prison pipeline. Student and teachers also benefit from restorative justice as it has been proven to improve the behavior in the classroom dramatically. Additionally, I would encourage members of this committee through formal or informal means to work with the members of the study committee on the following questions. What are the origins of reported restorative justice and what constitutes true restorative justice? Who is a qualified restorative justice expert, facilitator, trainer, or consultant? In speaking with a parent of a high school student of color who is also a member of the LGBTQ community who experienced racial bullying and attempted to go through a restorative justice process, this parent stressed that they have seen restorative justice so-called experts who don't know the origins of restorative justice traditions, who are white centering folks who don't understand the intersectional nature of social justice work, who don't have background on systemic structures of oppression, and who have traumatized students in restorative justice circles due to their own bias. Basically, well-meaning people without the proper skills and background who may do more harm than good. Many of us are learning and growing every day how to do better, but I would hate to see a restorative justice program fail to serve the people who need it most because it is not structured in a way that is meant to avoid additional harms. It is imperative to have restorative justice facilitators, trainers, consultants who have lived experience, proper training and certifications, and a greater understanding of why this bullying is occurring. I would ask the study committee to pay special attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Now, is there anyone else here in the audience who wish to speak on this bill? Senate Bill 210, having to do with study committee for bullying? Seeing none, this ends session 210 on Senate Bill 210. Now, we can move on to Senate Bill 211. Open up the public testimony. And Senator Avard is here to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Senators. And for the record, I am in a wrong chair. I hate this chair. I'm going to move over. Here. Thank you, Senators, committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, District 12, introducing this bill, SB 211. The analysis very clear. It says that this bill requires school sports teams to be expressly designated as male, female, or co-ed, and it prohibits biological male students from participating in female designated sports or entering into female locker rooms, and creates a cause of action for athletes harmed as a result of the violations of these requirements. That is the essence of this bill. And as a father of 3 girls and grandfather of 4 granddaughters and 4 grandsons, I'm very concerned at how we've, evolved in the last few years, where biological males are entering into sports with biological females. It's concerning because there is a physical difference. It's obvious. It's been obvious. One of my daughters, she played lacrosse. And I've seen how aggressive the girls can get with lacrosse. And we were hoping that some of these sports, whether it's on a lacrosse team or a school sport, that some of the girls would be wearing helmets because it gets very, very intense. I've also seen lacrosse played with boys, biological males. And the aggression gets really, really intense. And the physical damage that could happen to some of the biological females can be substantial. It's also important that there is a physical advantage that the biological males have over biological females. I'm not going to debate that with you folks. It's history. It is what it is. This bill actually gives the security, if you will, and the ability for females to be competing against females of their own stature or whatever. This bill also allows for co-ed. If a school or an institution wants to have co-ed, as long as it's designated for co-ed, no foul, no harm. But it does protect the locker rooms from a biological male entering into a female biological bathroom. It's important for the privacy and for the safety. And yes, I will debate you on the safety issue. It's a concern. Privacy, safety, and if it is violated, it allows for it allows for a lawsuit. It allows for these individuals, the females or males, whatever, to have legal action. We're seeing a lot of things, and people are, we just heard a bill on bullying. Well, bullying is bad, but it happens on both sides. It happens across our country. It happens whether you're in school or whether you're in business, whether you're in politics. It happens across the board. And if you find yourself in a disagreement with somebody on a bill like this, I assure you, bullying happens. I've seen some of my colleagues in the Senate receive bullying because they have the same opinion that I have on this particular issue, to where their livelihoods are being threatened. I could show you a letter where somebody's telling me to put a bullet in my head. That's bullying. This is a sensitive issue. It's an important issue. But we need to stand up to the bullies. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Questions, Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Abard, for taking my question. In your testimony, you were very specific about safety for women's sports and about safety issues in school sports. And so if the safety is really the concern, shouldn't we be taking steps to make the activities themselves safer?
We can by passing this bill.
Follow up.
Follow up.
All right. Would you agree that if we're concerned about safety, there are neutral ways to address concerns like height caps, weight caps, strength caps in certain sports?
There's always that issue, and over time we have seen where boys have been required to wear helmets. They're in other protective gear. We can look at the history of hockey. We can look at the history of many of the sports. When competing with people of their own biological sex, that doesn't really address the issue of this bill, especially when it comes to locker rooms and physical advantage that a biological male has over a biological female.
Madam Chair, can I follow up on that?
Follow up.
Okay. On that line, in your bill, line 21, you have part 6. Any team sport or athletic event designed for males, men, or boys shall be open to students of either sex. If your concern is about your particularly targeted observation that does not have any, you have not provided us with any sort of proof or scientific studies, it's just anecdotal, but your observation is that in your opinion, boys have physical advantages over girls. You have left a space for girls to compete with those very boys on their teams that you claim shouldn't happen in the inverse. So why is there why are you not concerned about the safety of girls that would be competing on a boys sports team?
I'm very happy to amend that if you'd like.
So you are concerned about that?
Yes, I am.
All right. So you would want to amend out any participation across any,
Unless it's designated as co-ed.
Madam Chair?
Follow up.
Okay. So where does the safety issue that you are purportedly very interested in making sure is addressed, how does that go away in co-ed sport?
The choice.
It's frankly, it's like I'm trying to simplify this as much as possible. In co-ed sports, I'm pretty sure that there are no scholarships. There's no locker room issues, correct? There's no locker room issues because there's a privacy situation, and you're not competing for whether it's a scholarship, whether it's I believe that the co-ed would be, you're basically getting in there at your own risk. And if you're entering into this at your own risk on a co-ed team, that's covered. But if you want to compete on a female team against females, biological females or biological males, that's protected. The co-ed, you want to enter into that, you sign the agreements or you do the waivers or whatever is necessary, you enter at your own risk on that level. But the other two are protected so that if you don't feel comfortable as a woman or a man competing on a team that is designated for males or females, that's protected too.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I support the bill as written. There are exceptions where girls are exceptional athletes that make it onto a boys team or have specific skills for a boys team, and is very different with a girl walking onto a boys team knowing it's a boys team than girls teams being set up with a male walking onto their team that they're not expecting and not accepting. Also, I thank you for bringing the bill forward. I'm frustrated that we have to be here again because this conversation back and forth about what is a boy and what is a girl is just it's mind-boggling to me. As far as co-ed goes, are you aware that there are different rules for co-ed sports, different scoring, different abilities? They're not set up the same as sports that are set up for one sex or the other sex. And I just think this bill is so important because we are seeing girls sports spaces and opportunities being stolen from them. So I thank you for bringing this up. But the question is, are you aware that co-ed sports are designed in a very different way than sports that are designated by biological sex?
To be plain with you, I am not aware of that. However, the idea is that if you're going to enter into a sport where it is co-ed, knowing in advance, you go at your own risk. That's really the concept. But if you're not comfortable with that, and maybe the rules are as you say, if you're not comfortable with that, then you can be in a protected, say, area for your privacy, for your safety. And I know that there are some outstanding girls. Number 22 comes to mind on basketball. But she's like a Larry Bird. She's incredible. But at the same time, you put her up against a Larry Bird. So that's the idea. And again, it really is. It's just mind-boggling that we actually have to do this in today. And I just feel compelled to resubmit this one. I know that we had to do this last time. I'm giving you another bite at the apple.
Thank you very much, Senator Award.
Thank you.
Do you have another question for him?
Yes, I do.
I'm sorry. Have a seat. You have another question.
That's
Thank you. So would this bill exclude anyone whose birth sex is female from playing on a girls' team?
When you say birth sex, you mean
They're-
biological sex.
Their gender assigned at birth.
Their gender at birth being a female would not preclude them from playing on a female team.
May I follow up, Madam Chair?
Follow up.
So what about a transgender girl whose birth sex is not female, but who did transition at some point in her life?
I reject the premise of your question. If they're biologically born female, they're biological still. There's no science that says they're not biological female or biological male. If there is some type of medical treatment to change their hormones, that does not change the fact that 250 years from now, when they become exhumed out of a coffin, they will be still considered a biological female or a biological male based upon their DNA.
Last question, Madam Chair.
One more.
Last question. Senator Avard, in the answer to my last question, are you asserting that transgender girls and transgender boys, transgender women and transgender men are not women and men?
I'm asserting that if you're born a biological male, you're a biological male. I'm asserting that if you are born a biological female, you're a biological female. And I believe that anything that waivers from that it would be a violation from this bill if this bill is passed. There is, and it came up in judiciary, this whole concept of what is a legitimate trans? What is, I'm not done. What is somebody who is suffering from gender dysphoria and somebody who has evil intent? And I use the word legitimately trans because of the nomenclature that is required in order to get the idea across, period. But there isn't anybody in this room or any college or anywhere that can tell the difference between somebody who has evil intent in their heart to deceive, to gain an advantage, or who is suffering from gender dysphoria, which we outlawed any type of treatment a few years back. Or somebody who would be, in your mind, considered to be legitimately trans. And I use that nomenclature only because it's the only way I can describe it. There are some people who don't believe that really exists, but some will fall under a cult, or some will fall under peer pressure, or some will fall under wanting to fit in, or trying to be different, or there's a host of other reasons why people are not comfortable with their body, well, physically or mentally. This bill protects those who traditionally want to stay safe, want to have their privacy protected. You know, when I grew up, Senators, I remember the commercials. Virginia Slims, well, you know, come a long way, baby. My dad had a crush on Helen Reddy. I am woman. Hear me roar. In numbers too big to ignore. But that's been under attack, and I wonder where the National Organization of Women is on this issue. Where have they been? They've been silent. Protecting the glass ceiling, breaking the glass ceiling. You can break it. It's being done. I think this bill is time that we pass it. I think we protect our young ladies, our young men. If they want to play co-ed, let them play co-ed, but at your own risk. Let's keep the locker rooms where they are. Male and female, biological male, biological female. believe this from my heart, Senator. Don't mean to be controversial, but why should we drop our values that we grew up with? Because we don't want to offend somebody. Well, what about our feelings? Does that count? They do. I've had people come up to me and whisper in my ear from both parties, from independents, from Democrats, from Republicans, thank you for what you're doing. Don't back down. They're afraid to say it themselves because they're afraid of the bullying. It's out there. To deny it is not to be honest. If you disagree with a certain mindset, you will be bullied. That's all I have to say.
This is, I think we have talked about this quite a bit. Do you really need to follow up?
I think we just introduced the bill and we have the prime sponsor here.
I know, but you have asked so many questions already and you've had so many follow-ups. I'll give you one more follow-up
Thank you.
question, and that's it.
Appreciate
We
it.
need to
Senator
get
Prentice has
a
one as
chance
well.
for the other people who'd like to testify.
Senator Prentice has one as well.
And then we have the Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. I appreciate that. And thank you, Senator Avard, for staying for questions. The transgender community is less than 0.5% of the entire United States population. And you just asserted that you are fighting for the feelings of the other 99.5% of the United States whose feelings may be hurt because transgender people exist.
Never
Is
said that. Never
what-
said that.
I
Never
just,
said because they
following
exist.
up on your having said feelings. So maybe you could extrapolate on your
I
feelings
can.
being hurt because 0.5% of the population would like to participate in children's sports.
Never said because they exist. You're putting words into my mouth, and it's being toxic. What I'm trying to do is protect the females who are biological, who aren't feeling safe, who grew up with the traditional values that our ancestors grew up for millennia. And the males. And if you want to enter into the co-ed, that's your prerogative. Enter at your own risk. That's the foundation of this. If there are those who believe they are of a different sex, more power to them. But there are those that also believe that that doesn't exist. More power to them as well. If it's only 1%, why should they dominate the 99%? They shouldn't. You want to be what you want to be, this is America. That's fine. We love you. Be what you want to be. We're going to protect the rights that we've known for generations. Senator Prentice.
Okay, Senator Prentice.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Avard, for taking my question. I should have asked you this earlier in your introduction. How do you know how many transgender girls are playing sports, varsity sports or junior varsity sports in New Hampshire?
I do not.
You do not. Okay. Follow up. And just, do you know or have a sense or understanding of how school districts have handled, because there are transgender girls playing sports in high school here in New Hampshire, and that's why we're talking about this, how they've handled, say, locker rooms and accommodations in the past?
I know that there are some schools that are really struggling with it because they don't know what they can legally do and what they can't do, and they're at a loss at this point, even in my district. So in some out of district, they want clarification so that they don't get sued one way or another. They don't know. They don't know how to handle it. There's this. What do we do? Are we going to get sued because of discrimination or non-discrimination? Are we going to get, how do we protect this, or how do we protect those who are not in that category that we're trying to protect? They're confused. And so they want clarity. And I think this helps with that. If you need a, I mean, I don't know what more to add to that, to be honest. Bring in my, they're thankful. I know it's controversial, and I am trying to fix it in such a way that, by adding the co-ed, you allow that intramural, you allow individuals to play in sports and not be shut out, but at the same time protecting what used to be part of our culture for years. So
We all set.
that's all.
Good, thank you.
Senator Abbas, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So I suppose we can, when it comes to separating, whether it's this room, we want to divide up, lots of ways you can do it. But purposes of this bill, I understood it, and from your testimony, that for sports, with the exception of co-ed, you were actually, what you want is that the sports teams to be separated based on biological sex rather than gender identity.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Senator Sullivan.
Quick, I promise. Thank you for taking my question. So it's not as controversial as you are asserting. 80% of Americans believe that that girls' sports should be kept to girls. But when it comes to my colleague's question about how the school districts are handling it, so if one school district allows this to happen in their school and they have an agreement and they know how to work it out, where does that leave the district that their school that they're playing, that now has to deal with a boy competing on their team against their team? They're not equipped for this. They haven't had the conversation. They haven't agreed to this. So where does that leave that school district?
It leaves it in confusion, and where it leaves it so that this makes a standard across the state, and it allows for there to be consistency that everybody can play by. If the school wants a co-ed sport, that's their prerogative. If another school district wants to open that up, that's their prerogative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time, senators. This is not a good chair.
Okay.
Wobbly prevention issue.
It's
right
wobbly.
Well, maybe we should put it in
Okay.
the wall.
I broke a chair while testifying.
Okay, Tonya Rochette. Tonya. Not there. Michael Haley.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As I said earlier this morning, my name is Michael Haley. I am an attorney with GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders. I'm also grew up in New Hampshire and live here. This bill we oppose because it is essentially a copy of a bill that was passed in the last session and that has already been enjoined by a federal court. The court found that the way that the bill is written, it violates Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. And so if this bill were to pass, it would also swiftly be enjoined and is essentially a waste of this legislature's time. I'm happy to take any questions about the legality of the bill or about the current state of the litigation. But essentially, that's our position. And I also want to be clear that I hear the concerns from a lot of people that this is a new concept for a lot of people, and I absolutely support everyone's concerns about fairness and safety. And I'm happy to talk with people about any of those issues. I'm a teacher and I believe in teaching. I have no interest in bullying anybody and really feel like we can find common ground on these issues.
Questions from the committee? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. You mentioned that there was a ruling by the court on referencing the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Can you elaborate or provide any insight on that court opinion?
Sure. So essentially, the Equal Protection Clause requires that when the government makes distinctions between people based on some kind of a protected class, whether that be race or sex or religion, that the government needs to have a strong interest in doing that, and then it needs to narrowly tailor its means to achieve that. And essentially, because this is a blanket ban, it does not do that. So these are, I acknowledge, very nuanced issues, and a nuanced solution might be able to address the concerns about fairness and safety that are valid, very valid concerns. And by narrowly tailoring a solution to those concerns, it might be possible to create a law that achieves those without violating the Equal Protection Clause.
Follow up?
In that case, that didn't go to the Supreme Court.
That is correct. That is currently a case that is pending in the New Hampshire District Court. If it is appealed, it would go to the First Circuit, and that would ultimately end up at the Supreme Court if it was appealed further. So, speaking simply though about what the situation is right now, if that litigation goes forward and the court decides that the existing law is lawful, then there's no reason to pass this, because essentially you would have already achieved the same thing that this bill tries to achieve. And if it goes forward and it's determined that this bill is unlawful, then it would be struck down. So passing another virtually identical law doesn't really achieve anything either way.
Thank you.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Ward, and thank you for taking my question. So you talked about narrowly tailoring, and earlier on, and maybe I want to make sure I'm not confusing these things, but Senator Altshuler approached the bill's sponsor about some, say, different conditions that were maybe acceptable to bring to address a concern of safety. Is that, and I'll have a follow-up to this possibly, when you think about narrowly tailoring, are you looking at addressing, say, that in a narrow sense that could, could address the concern and allow the children to play?
I think that's a very good question. Thank you, Senator. So in terms of narrowly tailoring, I think this is something that just requires a lot of input from a lot of stakeholders. I think that the possibilities that Senator Altshuler raised would be one way to do it. I think it requires us to acknowledge that there's just a lot of nuance in this area, that different ages, that there are a lot of different ages of kids who play sports. There are a lot of different types of sports that have different safety concerns. There are a lot of differences in competitive advantage depending on the type of sport and age and all of that. And so taking all that into consideration is how you would form a bill that is narrowly tailored to preserve those legitimate interests without violating the Constitution.
Okay, thank you. No follow-up again.
Well,
No, I don't. I'm good.
okay. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So are you aware that just recently in January, that in the case of Tennessee versus Cardona, that the federal court ruled against the Biden administration's unlawful attempt to change the meaning of sex in the Title IX law?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, I am aware of that ruling. In response, I would say first that it's a district court, and so it's not binding here in New Hampshire. As far as circuit courts that have addressed Title IX specifically, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the Seventh, and the Ninth Circuits have all addressed the issue and found in some way that Title IX protects the rights of transgender students. And the 11th Circuit has determined otherwise. So I agree that there's some disagreement, but the vast majority of courts who have addressed the issue have found that Title IX protects the rights of transgender students. The other thing that I would say in response to that is that the determination that that discrimination against students for being transgender is sex discrimination does not require us to redefine sex or redefine how Title IX talks about sex. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case called Bostock that deals with Title VII, which is the anti-discrimination in the workplace law that prevents discrimination on the basis of sex in the workplace. And under Bostock, that opinion, which was written by Justice Gorsuch and joined by Chief Justice Roberts, both of whom are not both of them are pretty conservative. They acknowledge that you can't discriminate against someone based on transgender status without knowing what their sex is. And so therefore discrimination on the basis of sex is, or discrimination against someone for being transgender is sex discrimination. And there's no reason that reasoning from the Supreme Court would not also apply to Title IX.
Senator Oshaw, did you have something? Okay. Anyone?
No. I'm good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Emily Banfield.
Good morning again. Anne Marie Banfield, parental rights advocate, education researcher focused on academic excellence. I do come here in support. I think that there is a small change to this bill than what's being challenged in the court because it does include female locker rooms. So I don't think that's in the one that's being challenged in court. I could be wrong about that. You might want to check that. I'm going to just share with you, I worked with the Kearsarge parents last year during soccer season and really got to know them and really got to understand what's going on in Kearsarge. They do have a transgender athlete on the girls soccer team. And I think that it's helpful to understand what some, I'm not speaking certainly for all parents, but what some parents and girls on that soccer team have had to go through. Just for instance, the girls expressing their views on having to play with a biological male on their team. They have gone before the administrators. They have taken their concerns. They have taken their discomfort. He's sometimes in the locker rooms with them. And the girls were punished. Parents have been ignored. Some of them have pulled their kids out of the public school again. Once again, we're seeing this is many reasons why they're pulling them out of school. Some did remove their kids from the public school. Essentially, they've given up. Essentially, they've said, we're just going to have to live with this. So essentially what has happened is the girls have been told, shut up and sit down, and that's exactly what they're doing. So they feel like they no longer have a voice. The locker room is a big problem. To the point where, as I was talking to the parents, as I went to a school board meeting several months ago and did have the opportunity to talk to them, to the point where I asked them, I said, when your girls are feeling extremely uncomfortable in the locker room and you're basically telling them, just ignore those feelings, just ignore those discomfort, you're essentially telling them to, if there is ever a situation where they're in danger, let's say, you have pushed down, you've almost kind of made it where girls are now ignoring that voice in their head. And I can remember years ago, a police officer saying that, women should never ignore that voice because he was a person that investigated sexual assault towards women. And that a lot of women who are sexually assaulted are the ones who ignored that voice. And so when I explained that to them, it kind of dawned on them that like, wow, what are we doing to our girls by telling them, shut up, sit down, and deal with it? Your discomfort doesn't matter to us. Your discomfort is not important to us. We're going to do this whether you like it or not. And I really think that we need to understand that females, Title IX was brought in to give opportunities to girls that was not afforded to them before Title IX. So now that we have Title IX in place, we seem to be going backwards. We're silencing girls. We're telling them we're going to allow these biological males to take these awards, these scholarships. It's happened in New Hampshire. Yes, it has happened in New Hampshire, where they have been beat by boys on their teams. And it just feels like we're going backwards instead of forwards. So I just wanted to share that with you. Peyton McNabb is the girl that was smacked in the face with a volleyball. So can we bring in more safety on volleyball? I don't know. I played volleyball when I was in school. I'm not really sure would you wear a face mask? What do you do to make that sport safer if you're playing against a biological male? I played softball too, and I played on girls' teams, and I loved it. And I was good. And I was asked to play in a co-ed team. And I did it. And I thought, never again. I wasn't that good. That ball comes screaming at me. It was a heck of a lot different than when I was playing with the girls. There is a difference. So now I made the decision, and like Senator Avard said, you make the decision. You make the decision. But I made the decision to not play on a co-ed team ever again because I realized that I was out of my league playing with men. So, you know, I wanted to just highlight those points that I do understand that all kids want to be included on a team. They do, and I do understand that. But if you're a biological male, you can still play on the biological males team, or you could play on a co-ed team. But taking this away from girls that we have fought all this time for, I just don't understand that. You know, when he said, "Where's the feminists on this?" Well, guess what? I'm here. I'm speaking to you on behalf of the girls that have been silenced in Kearsarge, who have had their awards taken away from them. So I'm here speaking on their behalf. And that's really all I had to say. I don't get it. And like I said, I do see two sides to this. I do want opportunities for all kids, that's trans kids included. But I don't feel like this is the way to do it by going backwards and taking things away from women and girls. So that's really all I had to say about this. I thank you for taking your time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. In regard to Title IX, I am very frustrated to see the way it's being manipulated to be used against girls, something that was once put in place to protect them. But you mentioned Kearsarge. Also, we know there's other schools in the state that are seeing this. Bow, for example, the girls and their parents have been not only bullied, but they face serious social consequences for simply standing up for their daughters and protecting everything that they work so hard for, and protecting their sports spaces and their opportunities, especially when it comes to their college opportunities. Do you believe that this would put these difficult situations to rest if there is a law in place that supports these families and these girls?
Yes, because it doesn't take anything away from anybody. Everybody's still capable of playing on some team. It's not like you're going to deny this 1%. You can still play on a team. It's just that you're not going to go backwards to the way it used to be, where girls didn't have these opportunities. And yes, I have been into the court case in Bow. I sat through the court hearing in Bow where those parents were punished just for wearing a wristband to the game. That's what they wore to the game, supporting their daughters. I mean, again, we're trying to silence people. It's a First Amendment cause going to the courts. Now we're silencing parents for saying, hey, I support my daughters playing in the sport, in the girls' sport. She mentioned bullying. I mean, I don't know how that's not, I see it as bullying. I mean, you can't wear a wristband. What, we're going to take away t-shirts next? What are we going to do to silence people? And I'm really saddened to hear that the girls just gave up in Kearsarge. They just gave up. They feel like they're getting nowhere.
Thank you.
More to add to that. Okay. Thank you.
Pash Roberts.
Stay away from the wobbly chair. So good morning again, and honorable members of the education committee. I'm Pasha Roberts from Wilmot, New Hampshire, which is in the Kearsarge School District. I go to every school board meeting, and there's overwhelming support for our trans player in our town, and we're proud to have her there. And that team, by the way, did not have overwhelming advantage. They lost. They got to the first game of the playoffs and lost. Somebody else won the playoffs. So there was no unfair advantage for the Kearsarge team. I am on the board of 603 Equality, and I'm speaking against SB 211. So I'm here to focus and address on the bill's definition of biological sex, which in the bill is determined from the athlete's birth certificate. Typically, this assignment is based on a cursory view of the baby's genitals in the birthing room. I am intersex, which means I was not born physically male nor female. In physical reality, we often see babies born with mismatched or ambiguous external organs, internal organs, chromosomes, genetics, or hormones. These birth certificates are not the whole story. There is no simple test. It's not genitals. It's not the big cell and the little cell. It's not XX and XY. Those wristbands are wrong. There are 35 medical variations or ways that a baby can be born intersex like me. I know many people who are born with female genitals but are XY. I know people who carry two DNA types, both XX and XY. They absorb their twin. I know people whose chromosomes are XXY or XXX or just X. I've even met people with one ovary and one testicle, or people who are born with none. There are several variations where a normal-looking girl fails to hit puberty as expected. And it turns out only then it's revealed that they're actually XY in their teens. What are they in your view? Many intersex children have years of operations and hormone treatments to be brought into a male-female binary. I had 2 difficult operations myself, such as you acknowledged in HB 619 last year. This is not woke. It is just medicine. It is fact. It is how bodies go. It's, in fact, simpler and kinder to rely on gender for sports and other classifications. Biology is complex. My point is that you're resting the key definition of this law on sand. If a bill is based on easily disproven medical facts, the bill is invalid and vulnerable. My body proves that this bill has problems. I urge you to vote this bill as ITL. And I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Questions, Senator Prentice?
Thank you, Chair Ward. Thank you for taking my question. You opened your comments by saying that you're from Wilmot, so the Kearsarge School District, and you said you've been to every school board meeting. So I'm just curious because we've heard testimony that there's wide opposition to this, or there's some I don't know if wide is fair to the testimony that was given, but just because there's always, two-way, there's always two sides. So just in fairness, could you express what your recollections are of these conversations?
Yeah, there's 2 or 4 people that are against it, against IL playing. And sometimes they're from out of town. They drive up from Nashua, probably in one car. And then there's a whole row, sometimes 2 rows of us that are supporting her, 20 people plus, parents, doctors, community members. It's like this hearing. There's almost no opposition to the trans-child plan.
Just in fairness, I wanted to put that since you offered that you're from there.
Yeah. No, the school board meetings are fun.
Senator Sullivan?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I might come to your school board meetings because where I'm from, they're not so much fun. But I want to ask you, and thank you for being so honest in your testimony.
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable with a stipulation in here for intersex athletes?
Not really, no. I mean, you're not going to have a special team for intersex or even, transgender kids. There's 4 transgender athletes in high school in New Hampshire right now. So there's no real threat of that, but there's not enough for a team either. I think what I'm getting at is that the committee is going to biological sex because it seems more comforting and simple because you've been educated somehow that there's only these 2 things. My point is that biology is a little wild. There's, it's not that. It's actually simpler to go to gender and to say that, and we're respectful to go by which team somebody knows that they're on.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
We have quite a few more people who would like to speak, so at this point, I'm going to have to limit you to no more than 5 minutes per person. The next person is David Trumbull.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and committee members. My name is David Trumbull, and I oppose this bill for a couple reasons. First is I think we should support the value of inclusion for all people. Access to sports provides physical and emotional well-being for children, the benefits of working with teammates and meeting people from other teams and traveling. It carries over beyond sports because policies that promote inclusion in sports will carry over to an inclusive environment in our society overall. This bill, because of the way it defines the definition, moves New Hampshire towards a policy of denying the very existence of transgender people. It additionally, in the rhetoric that has been used, it portrays trans people as predators. This is not New Hampshire at its best. We should welcome everybody. Secondly, the competitive argument, with the evidence that we have on hand scientifically at present, misses the point of sports. Now, I'm a man, so I'm not going to speak directly in this. I'm going to quote to you from Sally Jenkins. You may know her. She's the first woman that was ever inducted into the Sports Writers and Sportscasters Hall of Fame. She wrote on this issue a couple times last year, late at the very end of the year in the Washington Post. It was reprinted in the Monitor. The article is titled, "Female Athletes Require No Rescue. In the transgender fight, volleyball saviors completely missed the point of sports." Ms. Jenkins says that she hopes, she says it may take years of inquiry to settle scientifically and legally, but you hope the inquiry is conducted in a way that doesn't portray women as thin-stemmed, shuddering orchids and trans women as assailants. She goes on to say that what she admires about women's sports is that they fight for the right to define womanhood in any way they want, free from anyone else's definitions of beauty or the appropriate ranges of what is feminine. And in the end, she says, in the meantime, competing against others who have various immutable biological edges is what we all do, men and women alike. That's the leading women's sportscaster in New Hampshire, in the United States, is saying, don't turn women into shrinking orchids. The competitive issue is really small. You just heard there's only 4 high school students who are trans women competing in this state. There are only 10, this bill covers colleges. There are 10 transgender students out of 500,000 student athletes attending NCAA schools in the United States. And that was from testimony from the NCAA president, Charlie Barker, before the US Congress. There's 10, yet you're making a bill that would say you don't exist. As for the issue number 3 of narrowly tailoring, as the attorney suggested, you could easily say, instead of a ban that will require athletes to have a certain amount of months of hormone therapy, and that would reduce the advantage competitively. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports in 2022 had an article called "The Literature Review Does Not Support Bans on Transgender Women Athletes." They did a review of all the literature in peer-reviewed studies for 11 years. They said there is no firm basis available in evidence to indicate that trans women have a consistent and measurable overall performance benefit after 12 months of testosterone suppression. The review suggests that sports should support inclusion of trans women in the female category in support until there is robust and peer-reviewed evidence that it is not safe or fair for other competitors. Australia did a review and they found that after 2 years of medicine, there's no time difference in running events. So as you heard, different events, there's different advantages, but certainly this would be one way out. The NCAA policy, until it was just, I'm sorry?
One more minute.
Thank you. The NCAA policy used to have a testosterone measuring. Those are more narrowly tailored than flat out bans. Lastly, this bill will result in misinformation. Because of bills like this in Utah, a cisgender girl has been publicly and falsely portrayed as transgender. In Florida, because of bills like this, students are asked for information about their sex assigned at birth. President Trump signed this executive order. He falsely stated that 2 gold-winning Olympians were transgender women, and they weren't. This kind of misinformation, the portrayal of people as dangerous, is where this bill is going. New Hampshire is moving towards, with this
5
bill,
seconds.
eliminating transgender people from our life. I urge you to reject it. Thank you.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Ward. And thank you, Mr. Trumbull, for taking my question. Since you brought it up, I just want to explore a little bit. And I'm not a doctor, but you mentioned what I believe are puberty blockers, correct? And if puberty blocker, it's my understanding that transgender girls, if treated with puberty blockers, halt some of, if not all of the traits that, the male traits that there have been concern might bring an unsafe, either an advantage or an or not be, put girls at risk in terms of like strength and size. So where I'm wrapping to here is it your understanding that puberty blockers, if those have been taken by these athletes, eliminate in whole or part this safety argument?
Thank you for the question, Senator Prentice. I'm not a doctor either, but I've done a lot of reading on this. This review from the Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport looked at 11 years worth of studies. They concluded after 12 months of testosterone suppressing medication, there was no significant advantage. In Australia, they found after 2 years, there was no advantage in running events. So it may vary from sport to sport. I think it also gets to the question of until somebody hits puberty, there really is no significant difference. And then at that point, you could take puberty blockers, then you could take testosterone suppressing medication. There's like a couple different stages of medication. But that should be factored in rather than flat out banning people from participating. If there's a way to determine whether or not somebody would have an advantage or would pose a safety risk, it would make more sense to do that since you're taking away their civil rights.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Ward.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking my questions. It's good to see you again.
You too, Senator.
And I always know you're ready to answer the questions. That's why I waited for you. And I do appreciate it. So in the issue of sports, without this law, what would to stop it's a biological boy or it's not even part of the transgender community from playing on the girls' team? If there is no legal separation, I mean, wouldn't that not prevent any man from playing on the girls' team?
No, because to sign up for a girls' team, you would have to say, I identify as a girl. So somebody who identifies as a boy couldn't play on a girls' team.
So it's basically the sports are going to be separated based on gender identity as opposed to the biological.
Yes, right. You asked that question of the prime sponsor, and you said, do you want the sports divisions based on biological sex, not gender identity? And he said yes. And so I would say we should base it on gender identity. But I also can see the nuance, and I agree with Sally Jenkins that we need to dig into this more and figure out exactly what is the advantage. Is it true in all sports? Maybe there's some sports where there is an undeniable difference in the rule might be different. The International Olympic Committee allowed different sports to make their own rules because of that very reasons. But for New Hampshire to just make a blanket ban when this, there may be sports where there makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. If somebody identifies as a girl at the age of 4, their parents know it. They start socially identifying as a girl. They live their life as a girl. Before they get to puberty, they take puberty blockers, then they take the suppressing medication. They are a girl. So for them to say, well, hey, you can always go play on the boys' team, that just doesn't make any sense. They've grown up as a girl. They fully identify as a girl. So why do a complete ban? Why not if you're going to have to pass some kind of a rule, if you feel the need to get involved, have it be one that accepts that there are nuances in this and there are cases where that would cause a significant harm to that person. The other thing is that by having these bills and by having the testimony that says transgender girls are predators, the damage that you're doing to trans people and saying that it's going to be based on biological sex, if you carry that out to its logical conclusion, it says there is no such thing as a trans person. So that's why we're now seeing them not being allowed to serve in the military. They're going to have to change their passport. We're either going to have to say we accept fully trans people as human beings or we deny their existence. And this bill is just one of many that's pushing us down that slippery slope to saying trans people don't exist. So it may feel like it's just a sports bill, but it's actually a more fundamental question. Do trans people exist? If they do, they should be treated with full human rights.
That's a follow-up.
Follow up.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my next question.
Yes, sir.
You did testify about, you referenced a study about someone who's been on a hormone treatment or puberty blockers for 1 year, and there's, the finding was there was no physical difference between, the competitive nature or biological features, at least in the sports context. My question is, if we were to allow, let's say that was the standard that we put in the law, how would a typical public school, a high school sports team actually monitor and enforce that? I mean, can you?
I think it would be a lot easier than enforcing this bill, because what you would do is say to a student, if you're signing up for the girls' team and you identify as a transgender girl, you would hereby attest, or your parents would sign on that you have been taking this medication for whatever length of time you decide. 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. If you've been doing it, then you can apply on the girls' team. But just look at what happens with this bill, where biological sex. How do you know who is or is not a girl? What about this girl in Utah? Because she's rather big, I guess. I didn't really go back and check out her case, but she's been identified falsely online as, let me just go back to it. I want to make sure I say this correctly, but okay. The example of the cisgender girl in Utah enduring harassment after being publicly and falsely portrayed as transgender. And this is from the 19th News, just February of 2025. How do you enforce it if it's based on biological sex? I suppose you could say, bring in your birth certificate. Why is that any different than a parent saying, I sign that my child has been taking this medication?
Ask a follow-up.
Follow up.
Well, my point is, the key to that study is that the person was consistently taking that medication over an extended period of time. I suppose you have the reverse, where just athletes take performance-enhancing substances that are banned. I mean, it happens in professional sports, at collegiate, all over. I'm just wondering, at the high school level, particularly, how would they? I understand, the parents saying this, but that they've taken this medication for a year or whatever the time period is. I'm just saying, to maintain the competitive integrity of the sport, how would they actually monitor whether it's been or enforce that provision? And if you know of any states that have a provision like that in the law already.
Now we're getting down to the integrity of the sport, So I think you have to trust the parent that if they sign that my child has been taking this medication for consistently, have the form be properly worded, has consistently been taking, and they don't, if this child identifies as a girl, they're not going to not take the medication because it's essential to them being able to be a transgender girl. But you have other issues with integrity. Some people have more money. They can send their child to that expensive summer camp. They're way better. Some people hold their child back a year so that they can get an extra year in high school sports and be bigger than other students. I mean, at what level, where do we stop worrying about the integrity of the sport and say the purpose of sports is not to win? I know, I've been a coach for 46 years. I've coached youth sports. I've coached academic teams. I've worked with a lot of kids. The purpose of sports is to be on a team, to have the chance to grow as a human being, to travel. Winning is like the least important part of being on sports teams, at least in my humble opinion.
Not to debate you on that. I'm not sure I agree. I'm not sure I agree with that part.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you
for taking my question.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you. I just, for clarity, the term cisgender, a lot of us find very offensive. So I'd ask if we could refrain from using that when we're having conversations. Biological women do find that offensive. And I'd also like to say that I just want to put to rest the fact that anyone is trying to say that transgender people are predators or that we're trying to erase them. That has come from people that are opposing this bill. That has not come from anybody that supports this bill. Okay, so I want to make that clear. But when you're talking about people who identify as a girl, they are not girls. You can say that you identify as something. That does not make you biologically so. And sports are broken up, have been forever by biological sex unless they are a co-ed sport. And when you're talking about, I disagree with the fact that you said that it's about just being on a team. Of course, that's a big part of it, learning how to work as a team. But there are girls that have dedicated their lives, sacrificed everything, parties, going out with friends, to be the best athlete that they can be on their team to achieve certain things, especially getting themselves into colleges. And you seem to be dismissing them in these conversations. Is that your intention, to dismiss the girls that are trying to secure their own spot in their own lives?
Thank you for the question, Senator Sullivan. There was 3 things you said there. I answered each one of them. As for the word cisgender, I was reading directly from an article from a news article. So if I don't quote it correctly, then I would be misquoting it. So, but I appreciate your comment, and I'll take that into account in the future. As for why can't we do it the way we've done things in the past? I think sometimes as a society, we just have to realize that there are things that change. I mean, if we didn't do that, women wouldn't have the right to vote. Women wouldn't have the right to have a checkbook. Women wouldn't be lawyers and judges and legislators. And black people wouldn't have been allowed to vote. So at some point, it's like we have to, as a society, say, okay, we're willing to adapt there and learn and change. Change is okay sometimes. And in this case, I think change is better than going back to the old way. As to your question about, do I dismiss students in their hard work? Absolutely not. Like I said, I've been a coach since I graduated from college. It's what I do. And so I believe very much in hard work, and I've devoted half of my life to being a coach. And so, no, I don't dismiss that at all. But I do think as a coach, I've always felt that the wins and the losses take care of themselves. The personal growth is more important than the wins and the losses. So, and with 4 students in New Hampshire who are high school students that are trans athletes, I doubt very much there's a lot of scholarships that are being lost because they're participating. I've watched these young folks testify, and they're not saying, hey, I'm the best person on my team, I'm taking away anybody's scholarship. They just want to play sports as how they identify. They identify as a girl. They want to play sports as a girl.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Ward.
We had to be out of here at noon. So if you have written testimony, please just give us a summary or make a very short statement. The next person is Amelia Thompson. I don't know if you heard what I said, but we're running out of time.
I'll be
so
brief.
You have to be very quick if possible. I appreciate it.
I will. My name is Amelia Thompson from Newmarket. I will be very brief about how I feel about banning trans women from college athletics on the women's team. Now, I have been playing co-ed sports my whole life, and how I feel is that choosing trans women specifically to exclude seems very arbitrary to me, because the biggest advantage that anyone had when they were playing tennis against me was that they had the money for private lessons every week. So it just seems like to choose this one thing versus all of the options that actually give people an advantage in sports, it just seems arbitrary and it seems discriminatory, and it feels like there would be a better way to work it out than to have a blanket ban on all of the different sports. Each sport is different, the rules are different, each competitor is different, their bodies are different. So we can't paint everybody with the same brush. Do you know what I mean? So I hope you will take this into account and really speak with everyone who's directly affected by this and listen to everybody who's directly affected by this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Mackenzie West. Mackenzie? I forget what they look like.
Black.
Oh, there we go, okay. at this point, it's got as short as you can make it. Thank you.
All right.
We're running out of time.
So my name's Mackenzie West again. And looking at the bill for banning trans women from sports, one question I had in a collegiate level, where people are most concerned about fairness and competition, is how do we verify, or what's the plan to verify gender at birth or sex at birth for college students? Because I know with personally, I started my transition in Vermont. All my legal documents were changed in Vermont, and they were sealed under a court order. So if, say, if I was able to do college sports, in order to really comply with this law, the college would have to go through and try to figure out whether or not a player is trans or not. And in, say, my case, I don't have to be open about my identity. And for a large part, I've had all my legal paperwork and everything done so that I have complete privacy and the discretion to disclose what I can, what I want, when I can, or whatever. So I always just question what the enforcement of these bans are gonna be like, because there's no easy way to target trans people like me without also just, it's like catching cis people in the crossfire, because the amount of trans players in collegiate sports is minuscule at best. So you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, and not all these players are going to want to be public when there's increasing hostility towards these players. And it's looking at 6th through 12th grade, we see that these kids just want to play sports with their friends. So what are we planning on doing for the enforcement of this? And why are we specifically targeting trans women and girls in sports? Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you very much. Jennifer Smith. You've been waiting patiently here.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Ward. Other senators on the committee. Sorry, Mr. Ebbs, you have got to leave. Sorry. I am a medical physician, as well as being transgender female. I spent much of my life having to struggle with who the hell I was. And it took me until I was in my 40s to get real help with that. And for another, close to 20 years, I didn't come out publicly, even though I had been on cross-sex hormone, had absolutely no testosterone in my body now for over 25 years. So I can speak personally about this as well as from a medical point of view. But I want to start first with the transgender girls in school, because most of them will have had zero testosterone, and testosterone is clearly the advantage chemical. And by the way, if somebody wants to cheat, testosterone's available on the black market. So, and in fact, in the old days, the Soviets and the East Bloc clearly were doing that, and it creates an advantage. But how much of an advantage long term? And there is great overlap in athletic abilities between men and women. And I was a varsity soccer player in college on a pretty good NAIA team. We weren't NCAA. In those days, there was this alternate small college thing. We went to nationals. I was not first team, but I sat on the bench and played some. I was reasonably good. I look at women playing this sport now at the international elite level, and I go, whoa, I couldn't compete. There is no way. And none of my teammates probably, well, maybe two of them. There were a couple who were all Midwest, not all American, but all Midwest. So, you know, I think that's kind of a red herring. And these transgender girls, for God's sake, don't make them feel so bad about themselves. It's hard enough. You know, they've had zero testosterone, many of them, and those who have had testosterone, if you want to specify that they need to present evidence because you know they're transgender and you won't know who is and who isn't if they've moved into the state from somewhere else, as Mackenzie told you, you go ahead and say, well, you've got to present from your physician that your testosterone level has been suppressed for X amount of time. And collegiate sports, I did want to address one other thing that Senator Sullivan, you raised, was the chance of losing out on scholarships. To date, as far as I can tell, no one has given a scholarship to college to a transgender athlete. Leah Thomas was already in college when she transitioned. Her times did drop quite a bit as a woman 2 years later after she'd spent time on cross-sex hormones. She did not have overwhelming advantages. She was an elite athlete as a man. So this nonsense that, oh, this is going to allow men to just pose as women. Nobody's doing that. The shame for most men to present as a woman, my goodness, it's not going to be happening. And if it is, well, you police that. But don't make things so hard on our poor transgender girls. I just don't understand why people can't get that. And I do want to address briefly the fact that what our intersex person told you is something that applies, in fact, to those of us who are transgender. And there has always been within Judaism acknowledgement that there are people who are different. And Jesus acknowledged that too, if you want to read Matthew 19, 11, and 12. So it's really very clear that we have always existed. I'm Christian. I found a great deal of usefulness to my own personal psychology as I was going through gender transition stuff with,
Seconds left.
to be able to look at that scripture when I just came across it because I study scripture, and to say nobody ever told me about this scripture. It was so nice. So anyway, I am more than willing to take any questions. I have not prepared written testimony because I could just for you do the same stuff that I've written before. I've testified on this stuff several times. I'd like to stop testifying on it, frankly.
Questions by the committee members? Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Ward, and thank you for taking my question. I think you started to address it in your comments, and I believe you were in the room when I asked previously about puberty blockers and taking puberty blockers as a way to suppress some of the traits that are brought forward in these types of discussions as being the male traits as being potentially unsafe or presenting an advantage. Since I'm not a doctor, but you are, can you just give a really brief either tutorial or response to that? I think it's an important, we start to talk about tailoring things versus being very broad in this may be one place.
Yeah, no, it's all based in testosterone as far as I've been able to tell. There are conflicting studies because most testosterone is not measured as free testosterone, and there aren't enough studies of free testosterone and effects on muscular development. But if you want to talk about skeletal development, I am not the tallest woman on my tennis team. I am not the strongest woman on my tennis team. And I'm not the fastest. So, and I'm a mediocre tennis player, but I love playing. So I do it anyway. And yes, I've been in half a dozen women's locker rooms. I have had full bottom surgery. It makes me comfortable there. I don't detect anyone being uncomfortable with my presence. Maybe they are, but I'm sorry about that. I'm not trying to make someone uncomfortable. I am not a sexual predator. I am not a voyeur. I've seen plenty of women's genitals. I don't need to see more, thank you. And people don't undress that way in our locker rooms.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Senator Abbas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question, and good to see you again as well. I'm just curious, a prior witness testified about certain studies where someone would take, puberty blockers for a certain amount of time, and time period would pass where it would perhaps comes to the competitive side of the biological side in regards to sports, would perhaps make it more of an even playing field. How much time do you think a person would have to be in the transitioning process before they should be allowed, a trans woman would be allowed to play on the women's team?
Well,
or should it just be from day one?
I don't think the legislature can figure that one out, but the international sports bodies and the NHIAA certainly could do that. And I don't see why the legislature feels it needs to do that. So from personal experience, a few months I was losing strength. I happen to be someone who likes to do things physically, as do a lot of my fellow transgender women. So my 30-foot aluminum ladder, I can't move anymore. That's partly age, but even within a few months of being totally without testosterone, that changed. I was not anywhere near as strong. And if you required me now to play against men, even men my age, I often play against women much younger than me who beat me. But I just don't think that it's reasonable. My strength in a serve is much less. Of course, I didn't play that for a lot of years. It wasn't my primary sport. And I just got to the point, including from injury from playing on co-ed basketball pickup and getting slammed by a guy twice my size who was trying to block a shot. I just could not possibly compete outside of that. And it's not like I need to win. I didn't join women's teams so that I could win. I don't win most of the time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, Sarah Smith.
Good morning or afternoon, whichever it is right now.
Still
Sarah
morning.
Smith, Pembroke, New Hampshire. And I apologize if I repeat anything that's been said before, as the it's really hard to hear in here. But there just a couple things I wanted to say. I agree that this the way this is written, the definitions are kind of both overly broad and vague, and they discriminate, in my mind, against a class of people based on sex. And so this basically, I object to the fact that we are we're discriminating against one group of people based on one supposed characteristic, the definition of which is not clear and not supported by science. So I think that if we want to discuss this topic, I think it's an important topic that we really need to take into account the actual reality of people today, of trans people, and look at how we can solve this issue in a realistic way, not based on one factor. I don't think anybody wants to say that, okay, you are a boy and you said I'm trans and I'm going to go join the girls team. Nobody wants to do that. But we have to define it in a way that is realistic and takes into account the reality of the trans people today. You know, there are boys who are assigned male at birth, which is a preferred term to calling them biological, that have lived as girls for most of their lives, are pre-puberty and are on female hormones. That's a different reality that we have to take into account. So we're going to discriminate against those people based on one other characteristic. And one thing that nobody seems to have mentioned, but the fact that we have people who are assigned female at birth who transition to male. And according to the way this is written, they would be playing on girls' teams, right? There's nothing in here that says that they couldn't play on girls' teams, even though they've transitioned to male. So I think there's a lot of things that we really need to take into account rather than just saying this is somebody who's was assigned a certain way at birth and that's it. And so the levels, you know, looking at the levels of testosterone, I think as had been said, the athletic associations can look at this in a realistic way, but this is seems to be a trend of trying to erase transgender people, and when we've tried to erase people, it does not end well. I don't want to go down that slippery slope. So I would think that this bill would be, as written, does not actually perform a useful purpose at this time and needs to be withdrawn. And the issues addressed in a realistic way.
1 more minute.
That's all I have to say. I would try to answer your questions, but only if I can hear them.
Any questions? None. Thank you very much. Now, Linz Jacobs.
Members of the committee, I first want to respond to the sponsor's claim that there is no way to tell the difference between someone who is, quote, legitimately trans, unquote, and someone with, quote, evil intent, unquote. The 2018 non-discrimination law that is on the books in New Hampshire clearly states that gender identity is not to be used for any improper purpose. Yet, in the same breath, the sponsor asserted that all trans women would be barred from participating with their peers by this bill. Transgender young people, no matter whether they're in middle, high school, or college, want the same opportunity to play sports for the same reason other kids do: to be part of a team where they feel like they belong, to learn self-discipline, and to promote self-esteem. This bill is rooted in misunderstanding and insinuates that transgender girls are dangerous in sports, and there is no evidence to support that point. Trans athletes vary in athletic ability just like other athletes. I'd encourage this committee to read the Time magazine article, Inside the Right-Wing Movement to Ban Trans Youth from Sports, from May 16th, 2022. In the spring of 2020, Idaho became the first state in the United States to ban transgender girls and women from participating in women's sports. 2 years ago, 15 states enacted similar laws. 2 years later, trans athletes, particularly trans girls, are now directly in the crosshairs of America's raging culture wars as bills targeting trans and gender expansive young people proliferate across the country. But the reason for this explosion in sports bans isn't a surge of trans student athletes dominating the playing field, political strategists say. It's politics, plain and simple. Conservative groups and lawmakers realize that this issue could reliably excite base and potential swing voters, drawing them into broader cultural debates surrounding trans rights in the U.S. Quote, these bans are gaining steam for the same reason that election audits and critical race theory bans have been popular over the past year, says conservative strategist Sarah Longwell. They are PR campaigns masquerading as legislation designed to keep culture wars at the center of the conversation. The idea that trans girls and women competing against non-transgender female athletes tends to trigger emotional responses playing on stereotypes about gender and biology. The issue acts as, quote, sort of a gateway drug for people into the larger debate around gender and who gets to call themselves a woman, end quote, says a conservative who works on Title IX issues who requested anonymity to speak candidly about the rise in legislation. Quote, what makes this issue of trans sports different and so explosive politically is because politicians are willing to talk about it, says Terry Schilling, the president of the conservative advocacy group American Principles Project. APP spent over $5 million in the 2020 election combined with their affiliated super PAC on ads arguing support for trans athletes posed a threat to women's sports, among other messaging points. This is the end of me quoting the article. It's no coincidence that when anti-trans individuals started losing on the bathroom talking points, they started to pivot toward the sports issue. It allows them to exploit unfamiliarity with trans young people and talk about bodies in invasive and broad ways. These bans create unnecessary gender panic to the point of investigating non-transgender girls as well, creating suspicion that if a girl does, quote, too well, unquote, she might not have been assigned female at birth. A Guardian article from 2022, Utah school secretly investigated if winning female student athlete is transgender. Says that a Utah Student High School Athletics Association secretly investigated a female athlete without telling her or her parents after receiving complaints from the parents of two girls she had defeated in competition suggesting the girl was transgender. The Salt Lake Tribune reports that the Utah High School Activities Association and the girls' high school determination she was indeed born female after pouring through school records dating back to kindergarten.
You have 1 more minute.
It's disgusting that we're creating a culture where we're obsessing over what's in young people's pants rather than making sure they have a good learning experience in athletics. I TL this bill and I'm open to taking any questions.
Any questions? I guess not. Thank you very much. Anybody left in the audience who wishes to speak on this bill? SB 211? If not, this concludes the hearing on Senate Education Committee. Thank you all for coming. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Adjourn?
Yep.
We are adjourned.